What does weakness look like to you? Some trend lovers would have you believe not benching 600 pounds is weakness. Someone who flies weekly for their job might say that those who are afraid of flying, well, that's a weakness. And even still, something as simple as being afraid of darkness is seen by others as weakness. But the reality is the human brain is a complex organ according to the human brain, and because of this, things that are considered a weakness due to the fear of that thing to others may have just been really a tough choice to make. However, I believe I have found objective weakness. And I swear to God, it's about as bad as a group of Amy's from my episode over the ruins. So, come and join me in my mutual hatred of cowardice and betrayal. In the not-so-distant present, something strange would begin happening seemingly from nowhere and with no clear vector that would take the eyesight of a person, leaving them in a bright white environment according to their eyes. Described as swimming in milk, it would begin quietly enough with one man succumbing to this mystery illness as he became reliant on those in the city around him, which, if you know anything about cities, it's about as bad as you might imagine. However, those that were near him would soon contract the same illness, leading to a near 100% symptomatic display rate. However, no other symptoms would be cited or noted in this disease, and its ability to sidestep the human body's defenses would be a complete mystery. With this, what can we learn about the disease, and what can we learn about the pathophysiology of this infection? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode. But before starting, as usual, I want to thank you guys for watching and subscribing to this channel. Absolute ballers. Been a rough few weeks with family and some stuff that's been going on, but I should be back on a more consistent upload schedule. Granted, this channel didn't see a slowdown, but Roanoke Tales had to take a hit because I just did not have enough time. So again, I do appreciate y'all's support over there as well. We passed 100,000 subscribers, which is awesome. And I actually have a deal going on over there right now that if the channel makes it to 1 million subs by 2027, apparently Dogmen, like the Michigan Dogmen, is supposed to come out every decade, ending with 7. So I will literally go up to Michigan to look for the Michigan Dogmen. Anyhow, let's get to it. So we start off our story with the most annoying sound imaginable, traffic and honking. Seems to be a normal day. Everyone's angry and everyone is in the way. As a man sits at a red light, he goes to take off before stopping and rubbing his eyes. People lay on the horn as the man then walks up to see what's going on. As he rolls down the window, he tells the other man that he just randomly went blind. While he does this, Pauly Shore-looking dude walks around the car, listening in on the conversation. So, this dude says, oh, it's probably just nerves. I'm not sure that man has ever been to medical school. The blind man says that he just needs to get home. So here's the thing, maybe it's just me, but losing my vision would be absolutely terrifying. I've been plagued with this idea since I was a kid, and I mean, it makes sense to me. Most mammalian predators on this planet are sight-based creatures, and arguably, sight is one of the most important senses to the Homo sapiens race. We have an entire lobe of our brain dedicated to processing visual information, so to lose that kind of seems horrific. But this guy isn't really worried about it. Rather than go to the hospital, he just says that he wants to go home. Now, call me crazy, but again, I'm going straight to the hospital to try and, get back my sight, and I'll just deal with the medical debt afterwards. But Pauly Shore Light approaches and says that he will actually take this guy back home. Seems pretty eager to do so, but in the company of perfect strangers, I don't think anyone actually really cares. They just want to get to their job, or home from their job. One of the two. Getting into the passenger seat, the man begins describing what he sees. He can see light particles in his vision, which indicates the optic nerve is potentially still working and that the retina is intact, as usually blackness is what you will see if the eye is traumatically damaged. His eyes are seeing a blinding white light. So Bobby Zmaruski from the Goofy movie starts telling him it's probably a psychosomatic thing like nerves. Possibly, but we'll get to that later. As they drive, the blind man is then let out at a random stop, as then Chuck Betts takes off, leaving him behind like a real douche canoe. The man then stands in the road asking for help, but it's the city, so nobody really helps him out, as Paul Blart then comes back and brings him to his apartment, pretending to be someone else. He lets himself inside, kind of casing the joint, as then he puts him outside and locks the door. Solid move. Later, his wife has now showed up as she scolds him for not cleaning up stuff that he broke. He lets her know that he's blind as she just sort of phases through the wall into the kitchen, which is the weirdest door I've ever seen. She does the smart thing and dials 911. This guy seems really calm about his blindness as they then get to the taxi and head to the ophthalmologist. So I watched these movies several times in an effort to not miss anything, so the youngling who's sitting here in the waiting room is actually experiencing, well, he's not, because then I realized later I was wrong, but something's gonna happen with him. Anyways, the point of any of this is just don't cut in line. The mom protests, but for some reason the nurse then allows him to cut in line anyways. No idea why. Anywho, the Hulk then checks his eyes and sees that there's no damage to them whatsoever, indicating that this is a brain issue. Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch then give him a note as to basically telling the hospital what they should do, as Pallbearer almost gets stopped by the cops but then takes off, but as he does, he too goes blind. Back at the ophthalmologist, the kid is getting his eyes tested along with other patients, and again, I wrote this later, but I have to go back on what I said earlier. The kid is not going blind yet. The doctor, however, is the vector. Heading home, well, actually, he's more like a typhoid Mary. Heading home, the doctor is in a loveless marriage. Well, it's well earned. He describes it as amaurosis, which instead of everything going black, everything goes white. He goes on to say it's agnosia, which is an inability to recognize familiar objects, but I'm not thinking that's it by the symptoms presented as to what this person's seeing. It's not that they're not recognizing anything, they just can't see anything. So this man's wife made him an entire tiramisu, and they're clearly just not having a good time. Later that night, as his wife goes to bed, he stays up on the internet, which is fairly sus. The next day, we get some weird interaction between the pharmacy guy, or maybe it's the same day, I'm not really 100% certain, and the woman from earlier, but we start to see a pattern over everyone they interact with. She heads to a hotel, but as she goes up to the hotel and Mark then hulks out, the woman then mentions how she sees everything is white, and whoa, that was weird, man, but why is my vision still white? So she freaks out, and the cops pick up the nerd who then robs blind people and takes him back to his wife, which goes over about as well as a wet fart in church. I know I use that joke a lot, but I think it's hilarious. But anyways, the wife then declines him coming in because apparently she doesn't like him either. So back at the hotel, Mark just bails out on this woman, and she's at least I'm pretty sure that's Mark. I'm like 90% sure it's Mark. Anyways, I'll look this up. Hello, it's future Roanoke. I looked it up. I'm pretty sure that's Mark. Yeah. Anyways, so there's like a lot of this stuff kind of in the movie, so it's gonna have to be blurred, but Mark then goes back home and wakes up and realizes that he too is blind. He must have been infected, as his wife then looks into his eyes and tells him, oh no, you're fine, which, bro, that's like a really complex system. I'm not sure looking into his eyes is gonna tell you all that much, especially when like his pupils aren't even dilated, but his wife then kisses his eyes. Bro, infection control. They then call the hospital as they are dealing with a rash of blindness as well. Getting a montage, blindness is spreading like wildfire as nobody knows how the infection is actually moving through people. I guess I should use their names at some point. Mark's name is Doctor. That's it. So as they exit the house, a hazmat team then picks him up as his wife then jumps into the ambulance, which it couldn't be me if I suspected that my partner was sick. I'd just be like, yeah, I'll see you on the outside. But anyways, the government at this point has become involved, which we all know usually works out really well. They want to temporarily quarantine those who have become infected with this sickness that then becomes known as the white sickness. But guys, they use careful consideration to do so it won't be a problem. As Mark finds his bunk, he says he wants his wife to go home, but she won't. Later, the next group arrives, pretty much everyone who was at the doctor's office, along with the carjacker. They let everyone know how sort of to move around the ward as a fight breaks out between the carjacker and the first man to go blind. So, for some reason at this point, the woman from the hotel starts taking care of this youngling. Where's his mother? Who knows? They walk around the ward now to get a feel for like where everything is, as Polly feels up another woman as she then stabs him in the leg with her heel. The kid also pees himself standing there, as this is officially Pee Hallway. And then they tend to Polly's leg, but he's just sort of a tool about it, and that wound is totally going to get infected because she's been walking around with those shoes outside. The doctor's wife, and that's literally her name in the movie, is afraid to go to sleep because she's like afraid that she'll go blind, but really, she's already outside of the typical time frame of this disease and what we would see concerning sight, which indicates that there are outliers possibly influenced by genetic factors, but we'll get more into that in the science portion here soon. The next morning, even more people arrive that have gone blind. They go over the whole thing about who are you and what do you do. The first blind man is reunited with his wife at this point as a bell starts ringing. Doctor and doctor's wife then run out to ask the soldiers for antibiotics as the master thief from earlier injured his leg, but with poise, restraint, and dedication of serving the public, the government then pulls their force multipliers on them, informing them that their temporary quarantine has not come to its conclusion yet. So they go back inside before anybody catches some lead. At this point, everyone begins kind of settling into life within the ward, and the food sucks, but it has calories in it, so it'll keep you alive. Sort of like a 3 hots and a cot kind of deal. Doctor's wife then calls the emergency phone, but nobody's there to answer at all, which may indicate what's happening on the outside. They're running low on food, and they need actually a medical kit to sort of like patch up the thief's leg as his infection is continuing to spread. People continue to arrive, but they're just sort of milling about a little bored. Things aren't looking as organized as they once were. Mark sets up a guide system as the wards are now connected, and people are pooping in the hallway. I guess that's really what happens in temporary quarantine wards. So, This place is looking a little more and more dingy as time goes on, as a blind man from the doctor's office from earlier actually shows up at this point. He's been out there longer than anyone else and says things have gone from bad to worse. There's not as many radio stations as there used to be, but apparently most of the country has gone blind at this point, with a breakdown of society as a whole. No pain, just a sea of white. At first, people were required to keep working, and they needed to do more research on the disease, but then scientists, doctors, and politicians all started going blind. That last demographic would be an apropos solution to our current problems, really. So anyways, they all listed some music, and fun fact for you, if you didn't know, people that are actually born blind will still smile, indicating that it's not just a socialization thing, but also appears to be biologically ingrained in us. So moving on. The soldiers from earlier continue to bring others into this ward, which is where we start kind of getting conflict because you can't cram that many people into one place. Okay, so here you have a bunch of blind people, right? One guy wanders because he can't freaking see, so he goes outside of the line after showing up to a new area that he would not even know at all. And a soldier is like, stay inside the line, bro, and then takes a shot at him. Like, dude, why would you not put up a fence to funnel people into? You know they can't see. So a few people actually get taken out in the process because they all panic, and then the next day they throw a shovel. It's like, what is this, man? Anyways, the doctor's wife comes out pretending to be blind, as the soldiers then kind of mess with her. Remember, poise, restraint, and serving the public, of course. So she flips the soldier the bird and then goes back inside, which shows that she might actually still be able to see. But it's dismissed as apparently the blind adapt quickly. Dude, shut up. This is a regular person just like you. Anyway, so it's just humans. Humans adapt quickly. But Ultra Chad here, calm down. So the Hulk then goes to visit Ward 3, where he says they should elect a representative as there's been more food stealing than normal. But Ward 3 is more inclined to basically just say screw it when Mark suggests everyone pick a body to bury and do their duty. Which, maybe it's just me, but that's when you make them learn of your peaceful ways by force. Why does everyone get naked before they go to sleep here, by the way? It's just, I get everybody's blind, but I don't know. I'd still want my clothing on. I mean, it's probably not that warm in there. So, anyways, the doctor's wife then goes to visit Car Stealer, who's not doing so hot. He has some pretty good infection going on, as he then grabs her and he tells her he knows that she can see. His entire leg is turned black, indicating you might need to remove that thing at this point. Mark then asks his wife what time it is, but she doesn't answer because she forgot to wind her watch, so now she's kind of unaware of her surroundings as well. Polly realizes, though, that his time is almost up if he doesn't get some help. Dragging him outside, the soldiers don't immediately spot him as he starts yelling to them. Heading out, he just basically jump scares one of the soldiers, which is very smart, as he gets domed during these unprecedented times because he was a literal idiot. However, the soldiers now have potentially been exposed to whatever this is. The next morning, the burying of the people commences as nobody realizes who they're burying. The doctor and the doctor's wife have the right proper domestic over wiping Mark's butt, which he's blind, not paraplegic. Why is he having his wife wipe his butt? I mean, that's just something you're doing, bro. You don't have to have her do that for you. But at this point, Ward 3 leader gets on the horn and starts taking over the wards, apparently. He says that if anybody wants to eat, they will have to pay for it now. Okay? Form a militia, start stabbing. That's all I'm saying. So, society of the wards begins breaking down. The leader of Ward 3 brandishes a handheld somehow, and then lets off a shot as he says this is like a store. Doctor's wife asks him to explain the rules at this point, and that's the opposite of what you should do because it's basically confirming their authority. Ward Leader 3 then says to get their stuff to pay for food. Pharmacist rep says they need to stick together and tell the dude no, as arguments then break out on Ward 1. Doctor's wife says she's going to collect the valuables, so this is appeasement. Maybe it's just my nature, but that's going to be a hard pass for me. Maybe I'd get shot, maybe I wouldn't. But then again, you never know how you would kind of act in these situations until it happens. So Ward 3 leader then looks through the valuables and gives them food, except he withholds one of the boxes for themselves to have extra food. A fight then breaks out because of this, as Team Leader 3 then pulls a handheld on Mark and threatens him. So returning back to Ward 1, there's an idea that people will put up with a lot of crap until it comes to their food. And at that point, who's ever in charge, if you're withholding food, that's a great way to get your head on a pike. As Mark talks to this woman from the hotel, they end up connecting and engaging in the baby-making dance, because why not? Talk about Hulk smash, am I right? Even though Mark is quite aware that his wife can literally see, he still takes that risk. When she walks in on them, I mean, who could have predicted this? Massive oof. Yet somehow, she doesn't take him out in that moment. Also, Doctor's wife then tells the other woman that she can actually see, but it's a secret. Throw a haymaker or something. Like, what are you doing? And here we arrive at the point where good old Papa Roanoke would pick up a lead pipe and start swinging away, Merrel. Ward 3 leader gets on the microphone and mentions how everyone is now broke, so bring your women for food as payment at this time. And in the most beta, harmless, not a warrior in a garden, but a gardener in a war move possible, they actually acquiesce. Bruh. There's an attempt made to get the soldiers involved, but basically they say to self-govern because they don't want to go blind. So an argument. Why is this even an argument? It breaks out on Ward 1 over it, because the males appear to be rather sackless, and the females aren't too interested in going along with this. But eventually they realize they think this is their only option, because the men aren't willing to fight. Look, here's all it takes. You beat a few dudes down in Ward 3, take over, kill their leader as an example, and then re-implement the original standing. But it's going to take some testosterone to do so, and possibly some testicular fortitude. What was the parting advice by Killdozer and he left us? What was it? I was always willing to be reasonable until I had to be unreasonable. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things. This is one of those moments. And get this is the worst part. This is like when you look at your leader and say, you know what? I don't think you're fit to lead. Mark goes on to say, well, our male pride may be hurt, but it's up to them. Bruh. Okay, I get it's a movie, but how would somebody so weak end up in such a position of leadership, especially in like a tribal scenario where there's not that many people, right? Now, when you take like a country, it's a lot different. Weak leaders get in all the time. But when you take like 30 people, somebody who is like this definitely doesn't need to be at the helm. That's all I'm saying. What is it? There's peace chiefs and there's war chiefs. This is a war. So, well, because no male is willing to pick up a rock and solve the problem, the women go along with it, wondering how long before Ward 3 just comes and takes them by force. See, now that this has happened, it doesn't stop there, and you just showed your hand that weakness is prevalent in Ward 1. Maximum move. So the women then head over, and all that happens, and in the process, one of the women gets taken out by one of the dudes just going ape mode for no reason. So carrying back her body, the food is now going to be shared. Mark then's like, oh, what happened? Like a total virgin. Like, bro, what do you think happened? The next day, Ward 3 representatives come over to Ward 2, saying the same exact thing. So, I'm just saying, you're telling me, why would you not go over to Ward 2, band together, and then go over and just straight start ripping out tracheas in Ward 3? I hate. I feel like if Mark wasn't such a pansy, that wouldn't have gone over that way. But I know it's his character. I've got to settle down. It's just, seeing stuff like that bugs the crap out of me. But anyways, one of the guys' representatives comes over to Ward 1 and asks everyone there if they've recovered from the previous day. They mentioned how one of them was taken out, which seems to upset him, as that wasn't the plan, but it doesn't matter. Basically, eat lead, bro. But how will they figure out who it was? They won't. They don't really care. So the doctor's wife seems to be the only one willing to do anything, as she gets some scissors and then heads to the hedonistic den. Going to leader, she stabs him in the neck as he opens up on everyone. Everyone then begins noping out of there as he's just kind of wildly firing, and she threatens Ward 3 and then goes back to Mark. He mentions, oh, now there's going to be a war. You see what happens when you don't stomp out crap like that early enough? Like, dude, I hate you. Anyways, at this point, everyone begins barricading themselves in. Ward 1 continues to put their tail between their legs, saying, well, maybe if we find out who took out Ward Leader 3 and offer them a peace offering, they'll stop. No! Throw this guy out immediately. Be like, you know what? Why don't you go over to Ward 3? Am I a warmonger? No. Like I said, there's always a time to give peace a chance, but sometimes you got to give war a chance as well. We are animals, and animals can be violent, and bending the knee to violence doesn't do anything. At this point, Doctor's wife mentions how she can see, and then one of the women then heads over to Ward 3 and starts a fire, as their plan is to escape. Ward 3 is on fire, and that's not good, so everyone starts trying to escape, which a bunch of blind people trying to escape fire in an enclosed area is not an ideal situation. Doctor's wife then calls for the guards, but nobody answers. She then opens up the gate and realizes this thing was unlocked the whole time, so they're free. Except, the world is looking kind of rough. I mean, you're free, but you're not really free. It appears as though society at large is non-operational. People are wandering the streets, being eaten by wild dogs, walking along naked for some reason. I mean, dude, just because you're blind doesn't mean you can't drop from exposure. And, you know, all the usual things, I guess, in a post-apocalyptic society. So as the group moves along, people are getting robbed for any food that they may have, and stores are typically being ransacked. Mark then tries to kiss his wife, but she swerves him, probably for being like a complete just no ball loser. Anyways, as the doctor's wife then enters the farmer's market, or market in general, she ends up finding some stairs, and she's able to go downstairs with keys and then find food that hasn't been tapped into yet. Heading upstairs, they try to rob her, but it's mostly unsuccessful as she still gets away with some food. And also there's some dude getting eaten by dogs, as one then runs up to her, the doctor's wife, and then licks her face. Pretty sure it was taste testing. So it begins to rain at this point as they head into a church with the rest of the group, as they find the statues, well, at least they're told the statues have cloth over their eyes, as a priest continues preaching. Everyone outside is enjoying the rain for one reason or another, as hippie dancing commences. I'm a little confused as to why this was a big thing. I guess because maybe they were in the wards for so long. I imagine this is some form of allegory, but I mean, I don't know. What is this? Anyways, everyone starts hugging, which I further don't know what's happening. And now everyone is wet and likely fairly cold. Going back to the church, they came up with a plan that they're just going to stay the night there, and since they have a leader who can actually see, she says they will go back to Mark in her own house basically the next day, considering, I mean, it's as good a place as any. The group then decides that they're just going to stay together at this point, but the real move would be to leave the city entirely because food is going to become an issue. But eventually, they do get to the house and they all head inside and then strip and put on clean clothes, and then we get this like shower scene out of nowhere. 10 out of 10 movie. I can't show you any of this because this is definitely going against the terms of service. The blind man then wants to continue living together and hopes that it goes on like this forever because clearly he has nobody else, which is a little depressing. So at this point, everyone appears to be over their blindness depression and is settling into life. Mark hooks up with his wife, which I don't know how she's dealing with that, but the next morning, as they all hang out together and discuss, all right, we're going to need to figure out this food situation, the original blind man, who basically appears to have been the first infected, gets his coffee poured and has his sight suddenly return to him. This would indicate that likely others' sight may return to them at some point, and depending on how long they've been infected, it may just, be a little bit away, or maybe they've learned the power of love, which broke the psychosomatic hold. Ha! Can you imagine? No, it was definitely a communicable disease of some sort. But this isn't great news to the old blind man, as he will likely go back to his original life, being left alone, but then again, probably not, because they are all just straight, trauma bonded at this point. Thus concludes blindness. There is nothing I can think of more disturbing than blindness and neuropathy. I'm actually a sufferer of migraine attacks, and if I eat anything that I shouldn't, it totally screws up my day. It's incredibly dumb, but vitamin B12 for multivitamins, but only multivitamins in Red Bull, as well as monosodium glutamate, or MSG, from ramen, will trigger migraines in me, and there are visual disturbances. It's interesting if you step back and have an objective standpoint on it and analyze it, but horrifying if you're the one experiencing it. The center of my vision will appear like a dead pixel on a TV. There's light, but I cannot see anything in that tiny little pinprick. If I pay attention to my peripheral vision, I will also notice there's gigantic blind spots where, let's say I'm reading something, right? And there's words written to the side of my vision. They will appear like this. Let's say it's on a computer screen. It will appear that the computer screen is there in my vision. However, I'm not actually taking in that visual information. That's right. Most of the vision you experience isn't even actually something technically seen by you. In a lot of cases, your brain will automatically fill in that information because it knows that it should be there. When I have a migraine, those blind spots in my brain are actually filled in by my brain, or normally filled in my brain, because it knows something should be there, but there's no visual information coming in to give it a hint as to what should be there. So it's just a blurry, vague picture that if I focus, I realize there are missing pieces. At that point, a shimmer will appear as a crescent moon shape from the dead pixel in the center of my vision and begin spreading outward. It's sort of like the edge of a kaleidoscope, but way less nauseating. This crescent shape will slowly spread out in a zigzag line towards the peripheral of my vision, where eventually it will disappear from my field of view about 5 minutes later. After that, a headache will hit from here, where difficulty concentrating, an ice pick feeling just above my eyeball, and the need to consume a ton of salt and water will all hit me. All in all, I'm lucky because my brothers and my mother have told me they've been just crippled by migraines, but I can usually kind of power through it. The other interesting aspect is how my brain will react before and after this process. Days before I get this migraine, my mood will be lower and my patience will be much thinner. I'll be more agitated and tired, which will usually be a heads up that this is going to hit in a few days. However, about 3 hours after the migraine, I will enter a euphoric stage where I'm still definitely in pain, but I appear to be firing on all cylinders. However, later into the process, my mind will be more scattered and it's harder to do things like write, for instance, as I'm all over the place. You can kind of almost think of it as like a mini form of bipolarism due to the disruption caused by the migraine. Depression first and then mania after, but not near as pronounced as actual, like a bipolarism designation. The human brain, as mentioned, is a fairly complex organ according to itself, and as a result, neuropathy associated with the central nervous system is something I find incredibly distressing, because while the body itself can have issues, at the end of the day, your body is just a walking life support meat mech. Your central nervous system and soul are what make you, you. When those things are impacted, it can alter and change your very being, and as such, diseases that target these areas can be highly alarming to not only me, but anyone who's concerned about staying in the land of the living for an extended period of time, or are concerned with basically the quality of being in the land of the living. This disease is one that appears to target the central nervous system, and with it, appears to have an affinity for the white matter over the gray matter, given the symptoms that we see with the progression of this disease. However, despite most of the world being infected, or assumedly so, it could, I guess, just be a city, as not much information is shed, but I would have to assume that if planes are falling out of the sky, it is a world event. There are still those who remain either resistant or outright immune to this infection. But to understand why they might be and what sort of cure there could possibly be that would accelerate convalescence, big words, we need to first establish where this disease came from and what are the effects on the human body. The first thing we see with the symptoms of this disease is that it comes on fairly quickly. There are no symptoms prior, such as fever, cough, flu-like symptoms in general, fatigue, or anything that would suggest there is a current infection. However, using what we know about how it spreads afterwards and being in the situation of being around that person, we can assume there is a component of it being an airborne illness, so the vector itself would be those who are infected secondhand, which means the vector, I suppose, would be a droplet nuclei from people talking, sneezing, coughing, or may even reside on dust particles within the air. We do hear people coughing in the ward later on, but typically that is not really seen as a symptom. After the first man was infected, the car thief that was with him, along with the Hulkster or any of the patients he saw afterwards, the disease would spread too quickly for it to be anything less than transmissible by person to person, seeing as within just a few short weeks, almost everyone was infected. The actual start point of the disease could really be anything, but considering we just had to deal with a respiratory disease, it's pretty much going to stick around forever now, you can clearly see how this stuff spreads so quickly. The point of entry for the body would be the standard routes that we all know of. However, remember that apart from the blindness, it does not seem to induce any other symptoms associated with an immune response, which means that while the droplets of saliva exiting the mouth from speaking or exhaling of air is going to be laden with this disease. But the lungs themselves do not appear to be impacted, and the body may not recognize the infection until it's too late, which is actually something that can happen depending on what type of disease it is. Because it is suspended in the air, I would have to go on a limb and suggest that we are actually dealing with a virus. Viruses are incredibly small, most smaller than that of bacteria, and because they can remain suspended in air for an extended period of time, this allows them to drift through said air, and I believe there are 2 points that the virus may be entering through. The first is it's going to be drawn in through the nose and mouth and into the lungs. Once entering the lungs, the immune response appears to almost be completely absent, which would indicate that the virus itself will prevent the cell from signaling to immune cells that it is infected, thus not raising any alarm that there is an infection present. This has actually happened with the previous strain of the current virus on this planet. This strain would suppress signaling of the cytokine produced by the infected cell that tells immune cells that it is infected by up to 99%, as opposed to the typical 90% interference that we see with the other standard strains. Because of this, the body wasn't even aware it was infected, which led to a viral load increasing, causing a massive response to the virus all at once when it was located. But by then the body was overwhelmed, and the person unfortunately would succumb to their infection as a result. Because of this, the virus was not able to spread and would quickly become a dead-end strain due to how aggressive it was. This mystery virus back in the movie causing this blindness may operate under the same parameters. It's clear the host cells would need to be subdued because if the alarm was raised about the infection, we should see other symptoms. But in reality, we don't see people struggling with anything until all at once their vision goes out. Because of this, interferon secretion must be stopped, and the virus must also be fast-acting enough. However, I do find it rather odd that even after the virus is discovered by the body, it appears that the immune response is exceedingly limited, as if it's not really dealing with an acute infection. This may indicate that the virus actually does better in some tissues as opposed to others, which is actually fairly typical for viruses. Some prefer epithelial, some prefer liver cells, some neurological. It just really depends. But once entering the lung tissue, it may be that it replicates rather slow to produce low levels that are then expelled by standard respiratory functions. But it does not do as well in like other tissues, such as in the throat or mouth, which stops the buildup of mucus and does not really alert the body that there's a problem. Essentially, within the lungs, the virus is laying low and quiet and not disrupting too much function to alert the body of an attack. Sort of like sending an assassin to destabilize a country versus an entire army. The other point of entry, where the more preferred infection point appears to be, would be the eyes. A lot of people don't realize this, but you can actually get respiratory infections that come in through your eyes, and this is because they are surrounded by mucosal membranes that can then draw viruses into the body. So they come in through your eyes, not the organ, but the area, so the orbital area. But this is why someone who's infected with, say, HSV-1, for instance, and currently has an outbreak on their mouth, if they kiss your eye for some reason like a total weirdo, congratulations. You likely now have HSV-1 through the membranes around the eyes. Not exactly ideal. But once entering the eye area, it's clear that likely it would enter the eye itself to a degree, or just end up around the eye in one capacity or another where the real infection begins to take place. At this point, roughly a day into it, or possibly even up to 48 hours, the person would be asymptomatic as the incubation period for the virus has not yet completed. But once the virus has entered the desirable cells, it begins taking on a different and more alarming pattern. The ideal cell for the specific virus to infect appears to be the neurons within the central nervous system, specifically because we do not see any of the other symptoms in other areas of the nervous system, and they appear completely untouched by the virus itself, which, given what the CNS does, this could be a blessing that it's so localized to one area, because this would be stacking bodies otherwise. Upon entering the orbital area of the skull, it would then head back into the eye, likely possibly not through the eye, but definitely back around it, and then move into the optic nerve. From here, the infection would then progress over the next 48 hours to alter the sight of the individual, and I believe this for several reasons. First, this infection appears to attack just the optic nerve itself. The occipital lobe does not appear to be affected, as visual information is apparently trying to be worked out by the occipital lobe as it continues to function, but incoming information it is receiving is scrambled, and as a result, it cannot make sense of it. This is why an overall white background is applied to the field of view, because with transmission of information by the optic nerve, it is just sending way too much to be viably discerned. If the optic nerve was sending no information, then it would just be your standard blackness or incredibly distorted. We also know the retina itself is likely not infected in any real capacity. When looking into the retina of a person, eye redness is a telltale sign of the infection that has hit this area. Conjunctivitis will also start to kind of ooze white and yellow pus that will start to get discharged, and blurry vision will start to begin. The retina itself will also show signs of damage during an infection within large blood vessels, and the patient themselves will have other symptoms such as, fever, chills, fatigue, as well as painful eyes in general. Because of this and the lack of these symptoms, even with the retinas being directly looked at, we can conclude that the infection itself is not present in the eyes. So if it's not in the area receiving the information, it's not in the lobe decoding the information, that means it must be at the bridge connecting the two, so the optic nerve. But the question at this point is, what exactly is happening to the optic nerve? You've got a lot of questions, bro. Known as neuro-ophthalmic sarcoidosis, this process involves the optic nerve, as you may have guessed, and also involves the inflammatory response, typically up to the chiasm, which is the anterior visual pathway, and may even involve the oculomotor, but in this case, it does not because the eyes can still move. This can also lead to things like vision loss or diplopia, which is basically just a fancy word for double vision. These, however, would not explain the all-white vision exhibited by those who are infected. Their infection seems to present something different from the blacking out of vision. Something to note about the brain and its areas is that there are two types of matters, which I discussed in my last video, but just a refresher, this is either white matter or gray matter. You can think of gray matter as like a CPU in a computer. Its purpose is to process information, such as with the occipital lobe being like a CPU. It processes incoming information from the optic nerve, which is supplied by the retina. The white matter is there to bridge or transfer information, so that would be things like wires and cables. Now imagine it like this. Wires can sometimes transfer too much energy, causing a short, which can end up damaging the CPU. This energy transfer can create several issues, obviously, but in the brain, these wires are not likely to transfer too much energy, but are transferring too much information. While this is unlikely to damage the gray matter will not know how to decipher this information. As a result, it may believe what it is seeing is all white in its field of view. But why would the optic nerve do this? We all have known for a long time that cells have their metabolisms altered by the presence of viruses, and in fact, immune cells can identify what cell is infected sometimes by this strange output. As the virus enters the optic nerve, the metabolism of the neurons may also be altered to enough of a degree that it creates a rapid firing of those neurons for what appears to have been months. The reason I mentioned migraines earlier is because, like with me, MSG is an excitatory neurotoxic chemical. The neurons of my brain are stimulated, and this causes me to see light even if it wasn't there in the first place. The same could be said for the interference in the optic nerve. As the optic nerve inflames, this would also put pressure on it, which also can influence the signaling to the occipital lobe. But I can hear you now. But Roanoke, if the optic nerve is infected with a virus, wouldn't that lead to something like meningitis? You've been listening to my rants about meningitis and brain-eating amoebas, haven't you? Fantastic. Typically, you would be correct if the entire brain was infected with something that was freely moving around. The immune system would panic, which would lead to something like swelling of the meninges, which can ultimately lead to your end. However, infections of nerves that lead to the brain or that are just near the brain do not always inspire something like meningitis. And for that, we turn to one of the most hated infections, as it's the gift that keeps on giving: herpes. There are two forms of herpes, one originating in humanity and one originating in apes that jump to humanity. Herpes simplex virus type 1, or HSV1, is the human variant, and herpes simplex virus type 2 is the chimpanzee variant, if I remember correctly. It's irrelevant to the conversation, but there is a misnomer about these infections that I'm going to clear up for everybody. The first is that HSV1, this is the misnomer by the way, only infects the mouth region, and that HSV2, which is the more aggressive form, only infects the genitals. This is completely not true. Both can infect you either orally or your genitalia. Those that have HSV2 orally, I feel really bad for them because their outbreaks are typically worse and more frequent, though it should be noted that there are those who have no symptoms at all. HSV1 is typically more manageable and will present orally more often than those who have it on their genitals. And if you ever want to know why it's called cold sores, it's because when you're sick, this basically creates an environment where the virus will reactivate and then it pops back up, making your life even worse. But also, Papa Roanoke is worried about you, so I want you to know two things from this conversation. First, HSV2 is on the rise alarmingly. It's really bad, like more so than normal, which I cannot begin to tell you the importance of being safe, because HSV2 can also viral shed along with HSV1. Basically, that means there are no open sores that you can see or anything that would indicate that the virus is on the surface of the skin or the mucosal membranes, but it is there, and it's currently infectious, and you can catch it, so be safe out there. So, those two things aside, moving on, both of these viruses will reside within the nervous system. When herpes is located around the genitals, it will house itself within the sacral ganglia, which is a collection of nerves in the lower back and buttocks area. For oral herpes, it will enter a collection of nerves known as the trigeminal nerve. This nerve starts in the brain near the somatosensory cortex near the brainstem and then travels through your head past the thalamus and is responsible for the sensation of your face, basically. Herpes loves to take up residence in this area specifically and cannot be removed from the body by the immune system, as it is such in a sensitive area, and so this is considered an immune privileged site. The only thing that's really going to get rid of it for us in the future is something like CRISPR, which I love to talk about CRISPR, and I could probably discuss it for about 3 years straight, so we're going to move on. The point of the herpes rant is to show that not only do viruses prefer certain types of tissue in which they can infect, and allows them to survive basically, but along with that, they can exist inside of your skull and nerves without triggering a meningitis response. This infection specifically pertaining to herpes can cause like pain, swelling, and then put pressure on nerves as well, changing that function to a degree. People note that right before they actually have an outbreak, a tingling or burning sensation can be felt where the sore is going to form. And this is because the nerve in that area is reporting back information to the brain that while that isn't actually happening, the area of the nerve in between those 2 points is telling the brain it is happening here, and the brain just doesn't know how to interpret it. So you see kind of where I'm going with this, don't you? Also, it should be noted that there are other illnesses that do target the optic nerve, such as Behçet's disease, lupus, Lyme disease, and really all the fun things in life. But I believe that the optic nerve, it's basically the same thing. As the nerve is infected, it will continue to relay strange information that just isn't going to make any sense. So just imagine it's like the tingling sensation, but for the optic nerve. So trigeminal nerve is to tingling, as optic nerve is to white background. So then this kind of makes this blindness pop up. So how does it subside? Well, your body isn't just going to take that lying down, and given enough time, it will begin fighting the infection by developing specialized counters to it. As some of the virus is destroyed, it will be picked up by dendritic cells and then brought to like the spleen or lymph nodes, as they are essentially asked, yo, B cells, does anybody recognize this? And invariably, one B cell will, which it will then divide and then begin releasing antibodies. Any free-floating virus then will be covered and destroyed at this point, and the infected cells that can be destroyed will be forced to go under apoptosis. The nerve cells, however, will not be destroyed. While the immune system can clear the viruses outside of the nerve cell is something that, again, the immune system typically will not want to destroy. Because of this uneasy standoff, it'll basically just sit there in a stalemate, and they will look at each other from across the cell membrane. I know I'm personifying, but that's basically what happens. So this essentially would make the virus itself enter like a latent stage. This latent stage has it go from like being active to entering a form of hibernation, and with the infection cleared outside the cell, the neuron no longer being altered as much, or possibly even just outright adapting to the infection itself, the inflammation of the optic nerve would gradually decrease until finally normal signaling returns back to the occipital lobe, giving the individual back their sight. This is why seemingly it just appears to come back out of nowhere, because much like the clearing of a herpes infection, one day it just sort of disappears. Now, this opens up the horrifying possibility that it could in fact come back. I mean, if it can happen once and people describe clearly they feel an outbreak coming on, that means there could possibly be a secondary outbreak happening. People are likely to go blind again for a period of time. And what's worse is that unlike a regular herpes virus, which requires, physical contact for the virus to spread, this spreads through the air. So with this, the concept of knowledge is power needs apply here. Sort of like when I thought I was going blind during my first migraine attack because I couldn't see anything. So I thought, no, this is it. But now when it starts to happen, for instance, I was looking at my wife the other day and her face disappeared. It's more just like a bro, really? And I pop some Excedrin and then wait for like 30 minutes for it to pass so that I can see again. The second time is rarely as alarming as the first. And if most, if not all the population regains its sight, it may be one of those things that people have to deal with. It's also possible that while the infection targeted the optic nerve, it was not able to stay so permanently, and after clearing the infection, you are officially just kind of vaccinated against catching it again, and you won't have to worry about it. So in life, typically the wild type of the disease has far more devastating consequences than, say, like a vaccine that is administered containing like an altered, weaker form of the virus, or like a dead version of the virus, or pieces of the virus, such as with mRNA vaccines. Because of this, I see several ways to keep those who are already infected from experiencing recurrent symptoms, and those who have not contracted it, just stopping them from getting in the first place. First, if the virus is in a latent period, your body would have antibodies to fight the infection, but much like with herpes, outbreaks can still happen, and it takes time for your body to get it back under control. The key here would be an antiviral medication, as well as a type of steroid known as, and this is a mouthful, methylprednisolone, which is a synthetic corticosteroid administered intravenously and would help mitigate the issue of inflammation in the optic nerve, and it's also an immunosuppressant as well. From here, typical oral steroids are given as condition is pretty much monitored at this point. Success rates have been very high utilizing these medications and this technique. The antiviral medication, for obvious reasons, would stop the virus from getting out of control and requiring your body to respond in the way that it does for a subsequent outbreak. The other option is vaccinating those who have not already been infected so that the body can then recognize the virus before it gets to the point that it has infected the optic nerve heavily and causes inflammation. Because, remember, vaccines don't prevent infection, they prevent symptoms. I swear, whoever that idiot was on TV that dribbled out that they prevent infection itself needs to have their vocal cords removed. But I could talk about that all day. Just remember, even with polio vaccines, people have still tested positive for polio after the fact. The other option is, as mentioned earlier, this cold could just be a transient virus. After being removed from the system by the body, inflammation goes down and the virus is destroyed, and the body then is able to heal back to the point that the person's sight then returns and they're good to go, meaning they don't really have to worry about it. But this does kind of bring us to our final point that I would want to cover. What's the deal with the doctor's wife? Well, this isn't completely unheard of, it's just incredibly improbable given the sample size. We see that the infection not only spreads fast, but has a near 100% blindness rate. Near because clearly, given the exposure to her husband and everyone else in the ward with her, by all accounts the doctor's wife should have also gone blind, and yet she didn't. Why? This brings us back to the bubonic plague. Pretty retro, I know. There are those that, despite others dropping around them, were able to survive this infection. Longtime viewers of the channel know that this is because the Delta 32 allele mutation on their cells made this specific receptor coded by the Delta 32 allele basically go from outside of their cell to either being fully inside the cell membrane or only halfway sticking out. As a result, this made people more resistant to Yersinia pestis and also resistant, if not outright immune, to HIV in some regards. The point of mentioning this is to show that genetic factors that seemingly just arise from random chance can give you such an advantage on the playing field that if this were like an animal situation, her and the people who have the same mutation would likely be the new human race, because any others stricken from blindness for that extended period of time, again, if it were like an animal, would have succumbed to starvation, leading to a lot of dead ends genetically speaking. But that's how genetics works. Something about her genes made her either resistant to the infection itself, or she has a decreased ability, for instance, to produce an inflammatory response in the optic nerve area. This allowed her to remain seeing while quite literally 99.99999% of the population went temporarily blind, or it's assumed temporarily blind. One person's vision returning does not mean everybody else's vision is going to return. There are likely others like her given the sheer numbers of human on this rock, but for something to be this successful against the human race, this would be panic-inducing. Not just because of the blindness, but what if the infection went for the brainstem instead, or affected the SA nodes of the heart, disrupting the pacemaking ability? Definitely would be a virus worth checking out and understanding exactly where it came from, and exactly how it works, and exactly how we prevent it. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great, as it lets the algorithm know that not only do you enjoy this type of content, but also that I have provided education and entertainment in an adequate way. After all, I do this job for a living, so it's, probably something that I need to keep up with. So, subscribing is also awesome as we close in on 1 million subs eventually. Still, I think, like 147,000 away, but we'll get there eventually. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link for all those interested. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you as always to our astronaut, Wesley A. Weaver Jr. Thank you, man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Des Dancer, as well as our scientist, Countryside Limbo, Lakune, Logan Satome, and Tyson Nakanishi. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping the lights on in this place and helping me bring content like this to you. Alright, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.